A new era of Australian football is upon us this week. The Australian Championship is on the way, on the rise, and with it, a new podcast from the Round Ball Australia Network. The second ball, nice little double entendre there. Link to the Round Ball, link to the second tier, which we're all gearing up to see this Champions League style format that awaits us on the first or second weekend of October when South Melbourne and Sydney Olympic get us kicked off. But here at the second ball, we're jumping in early to run the rule over not your traditional kind of match-for-match footballing preview of this competition, but a look at the big picture. What is going on around this tournament? What should we expect? What will we learn? What will the success, the trials, the tribulations of this tournament mean for the game at a wider level? And for the first episode, at least, it's a Lockie squared operation. Myself, Lockie Flanagan, joined by Mr. Roundball Australia himself, Lockie Abel. Lockie, it feels like I'm talking to myself right now, but you sent me a text about a month ago with a brainchild, a desire to pick my brain, and it's led us to this point. But for those who haven't been in our WhatsApp messages, how did we get to this point? Why are we at this point?
Yeah, it feels like at some point you and I were always going to end up in this situation in a call together, Lockie Squared, talking football of some sort. It feels like it was written in the stars. But yes, obviously this is a very exciting time for Australian football, a very big moment. It feels like when, this chapter of Australian football history will be written in 10, 20, 50 years' time, this is going to be a pretty significant moment. And just kind of, from our perspective, wanted to give the competition the respect that it deserves. And obviously, the game of football is nothing without conversation and opinions. And as someone for yourself who has been deep in the NPL Victoria and the NPL New South Wales scene for a lot of time now, obviously we have a lot of teams in this competition that come from those two states. I thought you'd be the perfect person to come on and chat some Australian Championship football with me. And yeah, obviously the football on the field is one thing, but everything that's going on behind the scenes in terms of the vision of this competition and what it can be, and allowing all these clubs a new platform. I really thought that creating what is now, we've decided, the Second Ball podcast. Do like the link. Nice little note to, kind of the second chance as well for a lot of these clubs to appear on a national stage in some respect. And, hopefully we can be part of that conversation moving forward into a very exciting era of Australian football.
Yeah, certainly. Let's hope so. And look, I think I've got, not in totality, but somewhere around 50% of the clubs covered in some capacity. So hopefully that stirs us along. But there will be a regular contingent, hopefully, of other contributors from other states as we sort of have this top-down macro view on the health of the Australian Championship in this exciting inaugural season. That there's so much talk about signings and transfers and broadcast deals at this point, but the fundamental excitement for me, Lockie, is just, it's been, and for probably many of the people listening to this podcast, it's been 2 decades since we really had something new. Now, it's not a full home and away format. There is a resemblance to an NPL final system that we've had in the past, but it is this championship competition, the way it's currently set up, is not permanent, is subject to change depending on how the first 2 years go, but B, unique in its nature. We haven't had something fresh and innovative really for 2 decades in the domestic football as the A-League has been, charging along in place of the NSL. So I think that the main thing is just, it's so exciting to have something fresh to sink our teeth into.
Absolutely, something fresh. It feels like progress as well. I think a lot of people, including myself, and I'm sure you as well to some degree, have this utopian vision of hopefully what Australian football can be one day. And a lot of that includes, open leagues and pathways and, just the different segments of Australian football coming together and hopefully unifying in some way, and just allowing all these clubs with such storied history to, be able to present themselves on the national stage. And yeah, having something new. Obviously, as you alluded to, it's a championship format. It's not quite the home and away league yet, which is, most people will agree is where we want to be. But this is that's going to be a big marker of this season, is, getting all the data and figuring out, what this competition will look like. And hopefully from that information, we can then assess the road forward in terms of how we get other clubs, keen enough to make the same commitments as our 8 inaugural clubs, to hopefully get that quorum to go to the home and away season.
And it's interesting, right? So much of the discussion space is occupied by, and somewhat by necessity in Australian football, I guess, success or failure. Will this work? Won't work? But I think what gets underestimated in that conversation is actually the opportunity we have to learn. We now have 6-8 weeks, if you include the finals, of fresh information, questions that have been lingering over the game at a large level for such a long time. If these clubs, these historic clubs, particularly the foundation clubs, return to a national stage, will these latent potential or dormant fans follow instead? Will aspirational clubs at this level have a pathway to look to? We now have a basis to start answering those questions that have, if you've been around the traps in NPL for the last 5-10 years, are always scuttlebutt in the stands. They're always lingering questions. B-League this, B-League that. It's the first time in a long time that the first time ever we've had the chance to answer these sorts of questions. And it's funny, Lockie, we're obviously recording this the night after the 2025 Australia Cup final, which of course feels like a cup, the way it's broken out and broken down with the success of Heidelberg United, has provided this really perfect runway for the Australian Championship in terms of signalling the readiness of the second tier's best and brightest, both on and off the pitch. But I have to admit, when the Australia Cup key dates were announced initially, I thought that it was quite odd that the final itself was such a long time after all the other rounds. We really raced from the round of 32 to the quarters and the semis at a record pace. It's never gone that quickly, those stages of the tournament. I know that for a fact. But then we had this almost month-long gap from the semis to the final. And I think it was only last night, sitting down watching the game, that it made sense. Here is this, and for Football Australia's perspective, the fact that it was NPL v A-League, I don't think it could have been positioned any better a week before the championship. Here is sort of what things might be on offer in what's to come, because the football on the pitch, but more importantly from our perspective, the 10,000 crowd, the way Lakeside looked with the extra cameras as a free-to-air game, sets a very appetizing picture for having that at the exact same venue or having something similar in a week's time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, over the last couple of years, we've had these little tastes of what the Australian Championship might look like. We saw Preston get drawn up against South Melbourne in the Doherty Cup back when, Preston were in VPL 1, and obviously they've played league games in NPL since. We've had the state final series, which obviously draw big crowds, and we've just got that little hint of, the potential of what these clubs on a national stage can be. And you're absolutely right. The Australia Cup final on Saturday night was the culmination of that. Absolutely loved being there in person. The atmosphere was amazing. And I think it's really great as well, the fact that we got a story like this before the championship actually started. If this happens in a year or two's time, then you're looking back at, potentially the benefits of what we hope the Australian Championship will be, and point towards a club like Heidelberg's development. But because it's happened before that whole process, what we're seeing is as you kind of said, the NPL clubs really knocking down the door hard and saying, hello, we're here. Let us in, let us on this stage. And yeah, look, Heidelberg had an extraordinary cup run before this season. No club in this modern version of the Australia Cup had recorded more than 3 cup sets against A-League sides, and then Heidelberg decided to go and do that all in one run and not concede a goal while they're at it. So on the field, absolutely, they're killing it, and hopefully they can continue that. Obviously unlucky last night, but off the field as well, the feeling was amazing. And to be there in the ground, obviously there was a core Heidelberg support, but it also really felt like there was a very solid kind of Victorian football presence that wanted to be there for the occasion of what it was. It was really the curtain raiser to what we're going to see next week. And, a little bit of NPL versus A-League as well, I'm sure, but all in kind of hope and motivation for the potential of what we're going to see across the next 8 or so weeks.
It certainly whet the appetite. But as we get into the discussing each of the groups today and what they're sort of going to look like, what will be important, I think that element you've just touched on there is such a critical part across all groups. We know that, or we hope that certain clubs, particularly the more established ones, will have fans that come out of the woodwork. But what is the appeal? What is the dangling carrot for the neutral observer? What is the reason to turn up to a game that they don't support? Now, my personal view is that for many of these games and groups that we'll talk about, there will be plenty. But that is what is going to sustain and really be, I think, a marker for the health of this competition. The promising signs are that between, we saw a 5,000 crowd at the NPL Grand Final between Rockdale and Apia in New South Wales. There have been solid crowds elsewhere, but also in addition to that Australia Cup final, 8,000 between Heidelberg and Dandenong City. And, Dandenong City obviously had that Croatian contingent sort of pulling together. But there was a lot of neutral observers at that one too, who were just interested in the spectacle of that game. And if this competition is going to succeed, I think it needs to capture the minds not just of those who have lost interest in the game or in their club, but the ones who may not have an interest in a particular club as well. And I think those two elements lead us very nicely into Group A and into, I think, that the focus off the back of that Australia Cup final, the opening game of Group A this coming Friday, where 2 Greek sister clubs, 2 perennial NSL powerhouses who have contributed so much to the fabric of Australian football in the long term in South Melbourne and Sydney Olympic will get us going at the very same venue where we had the Australia Cup final, Lakeside Stadium. Of course, it will be on SBS Viceland as well before the Saturday games come in on the main channel for SBS. I mean, obviously elsewhere in this group, you've got Moreton City Excelsior, the premiers in Queensland, and Broadmeadow Magic. But I feel like this game 1, Lockie, is the place for us to start, because for me, this is going to help form the basis for what follows. The eyes of the Australian football public will be as firmly affixed on this game as they will any game in the Australian Championship. And that presents a challenge, but it presents a massive opportunity for Sydney Olympic and for South Melbourne, particularly for South, because they've just seen their arch rivals, Lockie, pull a 10,000 crowd figure at their home ground. So I think there's a lot of pressure on these two sides in particular in this group to show what they can deliver and really set the scene for this competition going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. They will feel a lot of pressure to try and match up the spectacle that we saw on Saturday night. And I think this is going to be a really interesting test as well of how the clubs in this competition interact with each other. In regular sporting competitions, in professional ones, when we're talking about commercial success, there's a really fascinating dynamic between collaboration and competitiveness. Obviously, when you go out on the field and you're playing sport against someone, you want to win and you want to have success. But in order for the competition to have success, you need the rivalries, you need competition, you need the league as a whole to be in an attractive position. And I think that's going to be exacerbated in the Australian Championship because of what we, started with, and the fact of the significance of this competition, what it represents, kind of breaking the glass ceiling for a lot of these clubs. In a large way, they are all in this together, and none more so than Sydney Olympic and South Melbourne. You said the sister clubs, they often play each other in pre-season. They're very familiar with each other. They've been drivers of this competition. But when the starting whistle goes on Friday night at Lakeside Stadium, they're warriors against each other. And I hope that is what we get. I hope we get a fierce contest. I hope we get a very exciting atmosphere. Like you said, Lockie, South are one of these clubs that has really been the driving force of this competition. And with the NSL history, with Big Ange painted all over the walls, and the history
Oceania
of the
history, of course. Let's not forget.
Absolutely. We hope there's going to be a lot of fans that maybe have felt like this club have been kind of shoved to one side and say, okay, this is the opportunity, come back out and support your club. So hopefully we get a lot of that, and it's going to be a spectacle, as you say. I think even people who don't feel a particular affinity maybe towards the state leagues or these clubs, it's just a fascinating case of what this competition can be. So a lot of pressure to get us off on the right foot, but I think they're up to it.
Yeah, but I think if this competition is going to run, I think Sydney Olympic v South Melbourne on the opening night has to walk at the very least, and probably gather quite a pace in doing so. But again, you've got that sort of basis. These teams having played each other in the Greek Herald Cup for a number of seasons and pulling serviceable crowds in pre-season, but they are the focus points naturally of this Group A. But we can't forget about the other end of the spectrum, because I think this is where one thing that is exciting, Lockie, about this competition is that two worlds that exist beyond the A-League are sort of merging in some ways here. And it's going to be a repeat theme as we go through these groups, but the foundation clubs and their desire, with the Avondale being the obvious exception, to return to the top is what people have their eye caught by. But then you have clubs who maybe exist in a slightly lower realm of notoriety, but are building things that are really impressive. And you've got, Broadmeadow Magic, who are a Northern New South Wales powerhouse in this group. But then Moreton City, for me, are also a really interesting proposition. Obviously, they've had this merger of two separate clubs, I think, Albany Creek Excelsior and Moreton Bay, over the last couple of seasons. And it has galvanized this, merged entity into serious on-field success. They've finished in the top two in NPL Queensland each of the last few seasons. They've, unfortunately for them, finished runner-up in the grand final, I think, in all of those years, but won the premiership this year. Here is a club who are clearly aspirational, pulling things together on the pitch, and they now, on the other side of these more established dominant powers at this level, get a chance to show what they can do, not through their history and what they may feel is owed to them, but just by being a really, from the outside looking in, well-run, functional entity.
Yeah, and aspirational is absolutely the correct word to use. You have that side of, 7 of the 8 inaugural clubs are old NSL clubs, and, as you say, so somewhat they want their return to this stage. But the other part of what this tournament is supposed to be is to provide that aspirational look towards what you can be if you do everything right. And Moreton City is a great example of a well-run club that has obviously been very successful in NPL Queensland this year and qualified as the top-ranked club and made it through to the championship. So by getting their house in order and then having success on the field, they earn the right to play against the best teams in the country. And I think it's a great example of another dynamic that's going to play in this competition, is the fact that obviously with these inaugural clubs, they've been locked in, and these are the clubs that have really been not only driving the creation of the competition, but driving the promotion and the marketing of it as well, of course, as they should absolutely be incentivized to do. But for a large extent, and of course, we're looking probably outside of New South Wales and Victoria here, because all the inaugural clubs come from those states. But the clubs that have been playing the best on the field are the ones that maybe haven't been noticed so much going into this competition. So are we going to have a dynamic where all the clubs that have been really talking about this competition and pumping it up, are they going to be as successful in it as a bunch of the state champions around the country who have maybe come in a little quieter?
Yeah, and look, I think for Sydney Olympic, that's a really interesting question because they found a bit of form towards the back end of this season, but they are a very, in my view, a real rocks and diamonds team. Their best is really, really good, but capturing it under Labino Halidi, particularly this season, has been few and far between. And 6 weeks you get to play home and away every team, but it's not a lot of time to turn things around if things don't start on the front foot. And I think for Olympic and also for South, depending on how they start with all of their exciting signings headlined by Manny Agwek, Moreton City looks to me like a team that both of those should be riding off at their peril. And Moreton for me are also a good example. Broadmeadow too, actually. The other thing about the premiers, as distinct from the foundation clubs too, is that many of them are the standalone representative for their state. And I'm not going to lean too far into the sort of state of origin comparison or drive down that angle. I've not been in New South Wales that long. But I do think that is another element that adds a bit of extra fuel to the fire of this competition. Broadmeadow are going to have large swathes of the northern New South Wales footballing population wanting to see them succeed. But I think it's particularly important and prevalent for Queensland because Queensland is probably in the process of getting to the Foundation 8, the place, probably maybe with the exception of Adelaide City in South Australia, where a lot of people are looking to for that extra non-New South Wales or Victoria side to come from, and ultimately it hasn't transpired that way. And part of the reason is I think there's a bit of a cold war. There's a bit of a rivalry between Queensland football and Victorian football. I've had a few conversations with NPL Queensland commentator James Coughlin over the years, and his tried and tested moniker that he always says to me is, well, Queensland produce the players and then Victoria buy them. And, it's often referred to Victoria as the NPL South Queensland owing to its propensity to poach the best talent. Well, if Queensland feel that they produce the best players, they have the best or better football to offer, then they get credit. Well, Moreton City now provides them the opportunity, a team around which to galvanise and show exactly like that against the Victorian side who, either them or through players who have started off at Bentley and been signed from Bentley to South Melbourne, a vehicle to showcase exactly that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of one of those things that we see coming out of the Australia Cup as well. Obviously, the advantage of the championship will be that we keep all the A-League teams out of it and we get these different NPL clashes, 8 of them week on week on week. And so having those little rivalries, those little bits of law that have been followed from year on year, constantly clashing against each other every week is definitely one of the most exciting parts of the competition.
The other part of that too is you can ask your way through a one-off game and beat a team on penalties. You can score a jammy 90th minute goal with your first shot when the other teams have 30, and you can ride off into the sunset into the round of 16 or the quarters. You have to go and play a second group game against them. That's where we start to sort the wheat from the chaff a little bit. So Group A is where we get started, and there's a lot to like about that group. I think it'll be much more competitive than maybe just the South and Sydney Olympic that some people are anticipating, particularly with Moreton City bringing in someone like Andy Pengelly, probably the best ever striker in NPL Queensland history. But I think we've got to look at both sides of the coin, right, Lockie? And I think, we're looking at it from a macro perspective, but as we move into Group B, for me, this really is the most interesting one. From a footballing perspective, Marconi, obviously one of the foundational 8 2024 NPL New South Wales Premier, joined by another New South Wales side in Wollongong. another of the foundational eight. Heidelberg, obviously the team that everyone is talking about off the back of their Australia Cup exploits. They are joined by, I believe, the oldest club in terms of history in the Australian Championship in the form of South Hobart. For me, from a footballing perspective, is probably the group of death. If we look at what we want to see from this competition, the crowds, the TV numbers, the player development, that's all important, but we want the good football we see in flashes in states. In flashes is maybe unfair, but we see a lot of at NPL level to be translated. This, to me, feels like the group that may go some way to giving us that. Wollongong, of course, underwhelming in their NPL New South Wales campaign, but the caliber of player that they have recruited, reuniting with head coach Luke Wilkshire, who took them to the NPL Australia Grand Final in 2019, I think there's a lot to like in terms of delivering what a neutral fan might want to see on the park in this group.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the pleasure of watching Heidelberg live several times this year. I'm fascinated by how they keep going in a season that for these players who, you can't forget a semi-professional. Their season has gone a long time. They've had an absolutely grueling cup run, and now they have to go again.
I think by the end of this tournament, Heidelberg, their season will be, I think, 14 or 15 months long. And then they've got incredible. A 2-month rest break, which is basically pre-season, to get into a new NPL season. We are a bit like Homer Simpson when he goes to hell and gets fed the donuts. We've gone from desperate for a donut to now teams like Heidelberg are getting all the donuts in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marconi and Wollongong, storied clubs, part of the Foundation 8. And then South Hobart as well, Australia Cup national stages this season as well, drew against South Melbourne in the round of 32, and it's really exciting. And you call it the group of death. I'll take your judgment on that, and it's really exciting. So, in terms of the crowds, and you say like it could be a good group to be the litmus test of what this competition can be. What do they make of it? It's a tough question.
Yeah, this is a fascinating group from a footballing perspective, as I said, but I think off the field, it really is an interesting one to see where the average health across the championship is, because I think we know and we hope, we have a reasonable confidence that the peaks will be high. We're going to get onto Preston later. We have plenty of reason to believe that a South Melbourne will, Sydney United, that they will bring fans through the door for this competition. We don't know for sure. But what's interesting about this group, for me, from that perspective, is that as good as they have been, Heidelberg, as good as Marconi have been over the last couple of seasons, Wollongong not so much, but they're also linked. They're not as noted, with the exception of last night's Australia Cup final for Heidelberg, in bringing colossal crowds through the door. Wollongong, I think, are a unique one, though, because they will get something that this tournament is obviously in need of, which is as much media coverage as possible. Wollongong being a localised team, they will get support from the Illawarra Mercury, the local paper. They will, and already do in the NPL season, get adverts on Win News in their local area, get stories on News TV. So they've got a vehicle to help promote their club. But Marconi's crowds can be relatively modest outside of event games. Heidelberg crowds, I think, were better this season, but are not always, if you think about the biggest crowd clubs in Victoria, they're not at the top of mind. And as impressive on the pitch as their cup run has been, the crowds against the A-League teams at Olympic Village have floated around the 1,500 mark, which is not bad, but it's okay. I think it could be better. And so to that end, if we are to believe and to expect that a national competition an exception from the sort of, forgive me if this is other people's maybe view and opinions rather than mine, but the monotony of season after season of NPL with nowhere to go. If that is to be believed, I think it's the clubs where they're not obvious pools in terms of having massive crowds all the time, where we're going to find out just how much juice this competition has got. And I think it's interesting in this group too, because as a neutral observer, as a fan, you want good football, and I'm reasonably confident that this group, in some way, shape, or form, will deliver on that. Will it translate to the crowds? That's the challenge. As much as we've got to be positive about this competition, that's also the challenge that needs to be overcome to see where it ends up at the end of this 2-year cycle.
Yeah, so I guess to kind of summarize what you're saying, like we brought it up at the top, but this is going to be a big season of data collection. And when you strip away some of the variables of, like the South Melbourne history and the specific push from a club like that for this competition, then you have these 4 clubs who represent maybe just what the natural pull of the competition itself will be when it attaches itself to a club like South Hobart. I think is like a great one, right? You have the angle of being the one club from that state and representing, Tasmania as a whole. And then you're representing, you win the Tasmanian League. This is what you get for that. And I completely agree. I think you said it well, that looking at these teams, and South Hobart is going to be a good one, and Heidelberg United, Wollongong, Marconi. Big 2 years. We know that the licenses, we kind of have this rollover period, but 2 years is kind of what FA have said is going to be our let's stop and have a look and see where we are. We might look back at this group and say, these are the kind of numbers that are indicative of the effects that we hope this competition can have.
Well, and another element that maybe we haven't addressed to this point, but something that will be unique to many of these clubs, particularly the ones who aren't as accustomed to playing on the national stage of the Australia Cup and haven't qualified as frequently, is the travel.
Yes,
is the people always make the NPL on planes sort of joke, but the championship will be on planes and teams will be making the trips down to Hobart. And does that offer an opportunity for South Hobart to make themselves a difficult place to come and play? We obviously know that they put in a very good account of themselves, I thought, against South Melbourne, ultimately in defeat in the round of 32. But beyond that, they haven't had too much of a chance to show what they can do at this level. Bayswater are going to be another fascinating one from that perspective, having teams making the long away journey to the west. But yeah, this is it's the group. I think all of these groups have fallen quite well in that there's something to really enjoy and look forward to in most of them. I think maybe there's only one where there's 2 obvious contenders for the top 2 spots, but this one feels, in terms of how 4 goes into 2, feels one of the most wide open to me, probably up there with Group D. The group that maybe feels, have you got any more points on?
Well, I was just going to say on the kind of like home and away argument at the season launch, where it would have been like 2 weeks ago, we did a number of interviews with the coaches, and the general theme when we were asking about what is your approach to this format, like specifically the Champions League format, the very consistent answer was you got to make sure you win your games at home. And then if you can go away, and I think that plays into the idea that these teams aren't used to that kind of travel. When we see A-League football, there's a lot of, apart from maybe Perth and then the Kiwi teams as well, there's a lot of you kind of just travel and you just play your football, and then we're going to play our way, and we're kind of going to do that a little bit irrespective of where we are or who we're going to. But traveling in this competition is going to make a significantly greater difference, in my opinion. So someone like a South Hobart, as you say, they're going to have very unique conditions. So traveling there is going to be tough. And it seems like the coaches are very tuned into that. And I think that might suggest that maybe we will get some slightly different styles of football depending if you're the home or the away team.
Certainly. Just a final point on this particular group. I know we've spent a bit of time on it, but the other reason it intrigues me is I think Wollongong is particularly intriguing as a putting a test to the idea of latent potential of dormant fan bases. But not like that's obviously going to be a case across the board. But I think Wollongong is particularly a fascinating one because of its geographical separation from the rest of the established clubs in New South Wales. You know, there is no other real example of a club occupying such a distinct market and being a big one-team town from these sort of foundation clubs. And let's not forget, you know, they won't be playing there. They'll be playing at Collegiate Sports Stadium as opposed to WIN Stadium. But in terms of a club who want to show that they have capacity for growth, when you talk about A-League expansion, Wollongong is always a name that people will throw up. The stadium is there, the local news coverage is there. A club like this has a massive opportunity to show the growth potential of football in this region and the re-emergence of it in this region, not just in the championship, but you know, maybe even at higher levels. Who knows? They're a fascinating one for me in this group. Let's move on to Group C. I think in terms of predicting all of these, this one feels from a footballing perspective like the one with two obvious favourites, as Preston and Avondale sit in a group that includes shock New South Wales Premiers, NWS Spirit, and the Capital Premiers in Canberra, Croatia. Lockie, as ever, lots to sink our teeth into with this group, but it feels impossible not to look at Preston to start with in this group, because I feel like their rise through the state leagues and the subsequent crowds and interest that has pulled in has almost had, I think, particularly in the Victorian NPL, a rising tide lifting all boats sort of effect. That I think that as they have lifted, a lot of the conversation, the drive, the passion for pushing the case for a championship, for other clubs wanting to have what Preston have in terms of the crowds and the atmosphere that they get at BT Connor Reserve, I think they've been one of the big driving forces for how we've gotten to this point. And from that perspective, I think it is hard to ignore them as, from a macro perspective, a big interest point, not just of Group C, but of the championship as a whole.
Yeah, you said earlier that I think we all feel relatively comfortable that the highs of this tournament are going to be quite high and successful. I think it's very likely that a lot of those peaks will feature Preston Lions. There's no doubt, as you say, they've come through the leagues and they've really attracted a lot of momentum behind them. When they qualified up back into NPL football, they made significant headway in the transfer market as well and made their intentions very clear. And, you know, why can they not keep going up? And BT Connor is absolutely pumping on an NPL Victoria night. I can only imagine what it's going to be in the Australian Championship. And obviously, yeah, I agree with your opinion that Preston and Avondale definitely look like the two teams that are favoured to go through from this group. But obviously, it's football. Anything can happen. And they're also an interesting mix between kind of this foundation club that is obviously returning to that level, but to their, Victorian compatriots in this group, Avondale United, who are the one non-NSL club as part of the inaugural 8. They represent, with their rise through the leagues, what the aspiration for pretty much every other club in a state ladder can aspire to with this competition. They're the perfect example of it. It's, the championship is that next level. Not only can you work up and work towards your state's top tier, but if you have a rise like Avondale, almost in spite that maybe you don't have that history like a lot of these other clubs do in the NSL, for example, you can be a part of this new era and forge a name for yourself in this new generation.
They absolutely are a testament and a test case. Even they will be a test case at this level of competition for what is possible when at a semi-professional level ambition is sort of merged with strategy and financing, because that's one thing that Avondale and Victoria have certainly never been short on. But for those who are less familiar with them, they have not by any stretch been top flight mainstays in Victorian football history. They have risen out of the state league doldrums from even further levels than Preston sunk to when they were sort of in financial peril in sort of state league 2. Avondale came from a lower base than that to reach this point, and the fact that they are part of the Foundation 8 despite their historical differences to the rest shows you what sort of capacity and means that they are offering or operating with, and I think have made themselves the envy of a lot of other Victorian footballing clubs in that respect. But again, we want what other teams, I think the capitalism competitiveness of people and of business minds, I think, is something that's going to help make this tournament, help make or break this tournament. I know that sounds a bit random, but stick with me. What we want is other clubs to see what the team across the border has, or the team down the road has, and think, gee, that's really good. I want that. How can I do that? How can I overtake that? And, Avondale may not be able to ever challenge, Preston for what they're pulling in, but other teams are going to be looking at Avondale, how they have assembled their squad, which obviously is in flux a little bit now, but after the departure of Zoran Markovski, but they're going to be looking at the headline name, probably of the championship so far, unless clubs have got surprises in the next few days, in Bruno Fornaroli, and thinking, how can I bring that sort of buzz to my club at some point? Because Fornaroli, just by definition of being who he is primarily a statement of intent on Avondale's side, but secondarily a player who is just going to, particularly if he hits the ground running and does well, having come fresh out of the A-Leagues, who is going to necessitate interest, discussion, and eyeballs around what Avondale are doing and the project that they have built to this point.
Absolutely. He's the clear marquee signing. Obviously, we have a couple of A-League players filtering around to a few different clubs as well, that a mix of maybe players that have just fallen off from the squad list, or some Western United players. South Melbourne have picked up a few of those as well. But Bruno is definitely the headline. He has a fantastic reputation for scoring goals and playing in big games, and I think what Avondale fans especially are going to love about him is the passion of which he plays football. And it's, I think, largely going to match the passion of how these fans feel going into this competition. And it's fantastic. And I'm interested in your opinion as well. Obviously, one of the other headline transfers has been Manny Agwek leaving Avondale after obviously becoming premiers. Was there any mix between potentially those two players playing together, or was it always going to be one or the other?
I'm not sure. I haven't been so au fait with Avondale having to make a choice, but what I have been familiar with is just how many teams Avondale have managed to beat for the signing of this particular gentleman. I think just off the top of my head, I remember hearing at one point that Apia was a done deal. I remember seeing somewhere that Broadmeadow felt like they'd just missed out on Fornaroli when he signed, put pen to paper at Avondale. So, there's clearly been a lot of interest in bringing him, and Avondale, the one who have managed to win the race, and they pair him up with a player in Amir Abdallah, who's obviously maybe coming off a bit of a down season, but is a gold medalist player in NPL Victoria. So his ceiling is immensely high. And I think he's indicative of a player who this championship is also built for in many respects, because he was a player who had trials at an A-League club off the back of that gold medal season last year. It didn't work out for whatever reason. Maybe it affected his confidence a little bit last season, but now arrives another opportunity to show what he is capable of at a higher level with higher interest. And I like that you keep coming back to the idea, Lockie, of aspiration and of merit, because I think in terms of what's capable, in terms of how you run your club, Avondale are a great example. But the other side of the coin is spirit. A great example of what can happen when you get things right on the pitch, but of sporting merit. They are a club who have come from like nowhere to be in the position that they find themselves in right now. Everyone thought Rockdale was a dead cert to make the Australian Championship, and then Spirit have not only taken that qualifying spot, but they secured a remarkable premiership under their now departed coach. He's gone to Sutherland Sharks in David Perkovich, but this is a team that people weren't even tipping for finals in New South Wales, let alone tipping for the premiership. So now a club who otherwise would be going, oh great, we won the premiership, now we brace ourselves for the fallout of next season, have another opportunity to showcase the best of their club, and you can't take it away from them because they did it completely on sporting merit.
Absolutely. And it's another one of those almost different categories of aspiration, right? A lot of people in Australia are fans of European football. You have those stories. I'm sure people are very familiar right now with Big Ange and his trials and tribulations over at Nottingham Forest at the moment. Forest are a club, obviously, with European history as well, but they're almost in that category of club right now where the goal is to have that really good year in the Premier League and then have a crack at Europe and put yourself on that platform and have a go at winning a big trophy like that. And I think, Spirit are a good example, a good comparison to bring that back to an Australian context. If you're not maybe, not many people tipping you to be too competitive if you state, but then you do well and you make it and you qualify for this competition and you get to have a crack at this big trophy. That's just another thing of what this competition can do, another avenue, a different category of club, a different way of viewing what success is. And I think it's great. And people are going to get familiar with the Arctic Circle now, which I haven't had the pleasure of visiting in person, but I hear from many people, including yourself, that is a very unique experience.
Well, I have, and in the deep throes of winter, I'm not sure pleasure is the word I would use. It depends how many layers I'm wearing. Also going to be a chance to elevate a very unique active supporter group that Spirit have got as well. The Spirit Juniors. They've got a massive junior base, obviously based out of the Gladesville Hornsby Association in the north there, and the juniors turn up with placards that have chants on. So expect to hear that in the Australian Championship effects microphone. Spirit, of course, premiers in New South Wales, but over in Group D, the final group of the championship, lie the champions of New South Wales, and a team who I think have sort of caught my eye, not for their football, although their football is eye-catching, but off the pitch. They have done something that probably no other Australian Championship club has done, which is the reason I cannot refer to them as Apia Leichhardt, the champions of NPL New South Wales, but joining Sydney United, Bayswater City, and Metro Stars will be West's Apia. Apia Leichhardt, of course, announcing, Lockie, this merger of sorts, this major investment from the West's Ashfield Club, who of course have got that association with West Tigers, who call Leichhardt Oval home. That's of course where West Apia will be based. They have a new logo, new kits, a fresh injection of players headlined by poaching Dom Costanzo for Marconi. But this is another intriguing sort of element of the Australian Championship in this group. potentially a model for other clubs to consider, depending on how the relationship goes between West Ashfield and Apia in the championship.
Absolutely. Football has had a very unique relationship with the other footy codes in this country, including similar kinds of, either support or mergers of different clubs in the old days.
Well, you saw a Collingwood Warriors jersey for the first time yesterday, so you can just say it. You can just say it.
I did. It was great. Obviously,
it's a very nice kid.
You referenced it before we started recording, but Vince's piece, about the Collingwood Warriors that he wrote during the week is a very unique part of Australian football history, but you can absolutely see what the intention here is, right? And you referenced earlier the idea of clubs looking to other clubs down the road or across the border and saying, oh, that's kind of what we want. This is a great example of that again. People are probably looking at Wests and seeing this is a very unique way to kind of set yourself up with a very good platform to grow even further. And they've been very public about their statement of, why can't Wests Apia be an A-League team in 3 to 5 years and continuing on. And just another example, and we're kind of rehashing the same themes here, but I think that's a good thing because it means that all of these different clubs are really taking this opportunity and seizing it, is that they want to be aspirational to more. And that is so to the core of what this competition is about. And doing all the off-field stuff right to set yourself up for success. And then it just comes down to the football pitch.
Absolutely. And the test and learn, the hypothesis or experimentation of this competition, I think, continues to crop up, and I think it's relevant with this team, because what advantages will being partnered with Wests provide? Will it give Apia access to things that other teams won't have access to? Will it, it's such an interesting counterpoint to the detractors of an opportunity like this, who say, oh, the money's not there to make it sustainable. Well, here are Apia securing, on the face of it, a partnership that does help to make this sustainable. And yes, it is only one club in a 16-team competition, but just because Apia are the first to secure something of this nature does not mean they will be the last. And maybe it's a model that other teams who are in need of greater long-term funding and have that ambition to be at the very top of the competitions in this country can be a path that they seek to go down. So they'll be interesting to look at from that regard. Sydney United will obviously be a fascinating one because of their fabled history, and I feel like they're a good vehicle, Lockie, to sort of talk about the opportunity for the clubs from this perspective is well documented, but the opportunity for the players as well in this tournament is massive. Now, we know that more NPL players over time have started to get their opportunities breaking into the A-League. I think we have seen the numbers of those players come up over time in the last couple of seasons, but this opens up another door as far as I see it, because this competition finishes in December. The A-League's transfer window will obviously open in January. So any player who has already shown a good bit of form in their local NPL now has an extra 6-week runway to hit their straps, show what they can do, and potentially secure a full-time professional contract off the back of this. There will definitely be players in the West Apia squad who will look to do that. But Sydney United have been a production line of young talent, of Socceroos talent over the years. Maybe they are but one of many clubs who could be a production line in this competition of more players into full-time professionalism. And I think ultimately more full-time pros in our game is what we want.
Absolutely. This competition feels a much needed hole as that kind of stepping stone between the NPL and the A-League as well. So for not just players, but coaches, officials as well is another one, with aspirations. I keep saying the word, with goals of, being full-time professionals. it provides that another step up, and it just takes away a lot of those growing pains, as you mentioned, in terms of, branching between those levels. And it goes both ways as well. I was saying to you privately, I don't think it would be a surprise if, in even as soon as next year, potentially, A-League clubs identify the championship as, potentially loan opportunities for younger players. It's just the timing of it is so convenient in that respect, as you say, right before the January window opens, kind of that beginning phase of the A-League season, and after the NPL. Obviously, it's people have different views on this, but it is a fact of the Australian football system that the NPL plays in winter and the A-League plays in summer. So that naturally makes things very difficult. So not only is it that stepping stone in the quality of playing and coaching and officiating, but also just in the calendar, as you say. So absolutely, on an individual level, for everyone who is participating or including themselves in this competition, it is a much, much needed platform. And as you say, the names that have come out of Sydney United in the past, have lit up the Socceroos for decades. So hopefully they can be one of those clubs that providing that platform for these players to go on to greater things.
It's an amplifier, and not just for the established stars of the NPL level, but I think also for young players too. Like, I remember speaking to Ante Juric earlier this year, and one of the young players that popped up, he may be 17 now, but at the time of talking he was 16. Michael Pratezina, who's broken out at Sydney United this year. He referred to him as being a young player who basically said he won't be with us much longer. He didn't specify what that meant or where that meant, but maybe, just maybe, while we're thinking about the prime NPL All-Stars who will be hoping for a potential full-time contract, maybe someone like a Michael Pratezina, there will be teenage stars, or the young players at Western United, or from Western United now at South Melbourne, who you mentioned earlier. Those players will absolutely be looking to put their best foot forward to show that they've still got the potential to be molded into something at the A-League level, at the A-League level again. A fascinating group from a football perspective too, this one. I mean, Bayswater City are coming off a ridiculous campaign, winning the Top 4 Cup and the Premiership in WA, but you look at the list of teams who have actually represented WA on the national stage in a home and away format before. Not a full home and away format, obviously, but the list is not very long. It's one team's worth, so Bayswater now have that opportunity. And then Metro Stars probably fall into that bracket of not established powers, but clubs who have gotten to this point by being well run, by showing ambition, and they've been really impressive in the Australia Cup for a number of seasons now. Consistently strong performers in NPL South Australia as well, even without that elusive championship, much like Moreton City. But again, a team who richly deserve a opportunity to showcase what they're capable of, maybe not at A-League's level, but beyond an NPL level. And so there's a lot to like about Group D as well. And I think this is a group where we'll see that potential for players to showcase themselves as full-time professional ready talent at both ends of the age spectrum really come to the fore. Definitely. The other interesting thing in terms of, like, if we're looking at challenges for this competition, everyone's excited for South Melbourne Sydney Olympic because that's a game that we haven't seen in years. What will the appetite be as we look at, like, the burning questions of each of the tournament as a whole? Well, we know the appetite for the games we haven't seen in years will probably be quite, and hopefully be quite large. What is the appetite like for games that we have already seen regularly at a state level? Does the championship shine rub off on those games that might at an NPL level have felt stale? Because as much as there will be fascination in Apia taking on Metro Stars in the opening weekend, in Sydney United taking on Bayswater, next Friday, the standalone game will be a game that we've seen many a time in the local competition when West Apia face Sydney United, and that is but one example of something that will happen across the groups. Obviously, Preston will play Avondale. Less worried about that one for obvious reasons. Marconi have got to do Wolves home and away. So these teams, by the end of this year, will have played each other 4 times. So whether or not that extra sheen with maybe a few more stars added to the rosters, that's another important question for this competition to answer. Like in terms of what fans who are watching Lockie, and we're trying to obviously take learnings out of this. What do you think are the big questions? What are the things that people should be going in and interrogating with each of the games they watch from a non-footballing perspective, perhaps? I know I've put you on the spot there a little bit.
No. Look, I think to just go quickly to your point about, what is the championship shine of an RPS Sydney United clash look like? The fact is we don't know the answer to that question, and it goes back to that theory of data collection and learning and all of these questions that people have had for years, if not decades, about what would happen if we did something like this. We're about to find out. And I think to some extent, not completely perhaps, but to some extent, that does make this competition a success already, because we're going to learn the answers to these questions. So people are obviously going to be looking at attendances. They're obviously going to be looking at atmosphere and how many people watch on TV and what the quality of the football is like as well. The fact is that we're going to get a starting point for whatever is going to happen in the next 5-10 years. Best case scenario, the SBS get killer ratings. It gives a lot more reason for commercial interest going into the following seasons of the championship. But even to play devil's advocate in a worst case scenario, at least we kind of know what our metrics are. We have some idea of what we need to make it successful. And then we can start thinking about a plan that can bridge those two things together. So this really is a fact-finding mission. And we all hope that the crowds are going to be big, just outside of the big ticket games as well. Hopefully RPS Sydney United gets a good, uptick in crowd because of the allure of the championship. Hopefully there is, history created from a Bayswater City 95th minute winner over Metro Stars that then, is revisited in 3 years when they're drawn together again in the Australia Cup or something. We want more of that history intertwining. And obviously the numbers are the easier ones to point to in terms of success. But just learning about what this competition might be and seeing how it interacts with the general football public, I think is a success in the first place. And then hopefully we can go and build from there.
Yeah, there's a lot of sensitivity, I think, around the concept of new in Australian football. And I think some of that is influenced by the fact that, we can, I think, be perfectionists. And we have good reason for that, because unless things are maybe not perfect, but unless things are very good in Australian football, sometimes they don't work out. Being okay is not necessarily enough, and we've seen things rise and fall over time for that exact reason. And no one's sitting here, I think, expecting this to be perfect. This is not being presented as, well, you want life beyond, you want a competition beyond the A-League. This is the utopian version. This is the final draft of what it's going to look like that we're hitting publish on this week. But it is a step. And we will take information from the good, and we will take information from the bad. And I feel like that is what people should be looking at over the course of this tournament. What is working, what isn't, and use that to drive the discussion. And hopefully, Lockie, over the course of this championship season, with a band of merry men and many others in tow, those are the questions that this show will get to interrogate.
Absolutely. I think you summed it up brilliantly. It's going to be an amazing watch. I'm so excited. I can't wait for it to get started. And as you say, it's a step in the direction of whatever personally you believe to be, the aspirational, there you go again, future of Australian football. But it is the first step, hopefully, in many. And I can't wait to watch it unfold and hopefully discuss it with you as we go through.
We might have to set up an aspiration coin jar for you over the over the course of this show. Of course, it all kicks off on Friday, the 10th of October. South Melbourne facing Sydney Olympic at Lakeside Stadium. Then come the two SBS main channel games on Saturday at 1 and 3 p.m. Metro Stars hosting West Apia in South Australia. Preston Lions returning to the national stage at BT Connor Reserve, or Janus Steel Stadium to use its commercial name, against NWS Spirit. Then a slate of Sunday fixtures that is going to be a regular affair for the next 2 months. Broadmeadow Magic hosting Moreton City, South Hobart welcoming Wollongong, two of the most interesting away trips combining. Heidelberg will face Marconi Stallions in an NSL reunion at Olympic Village, and then the final two games of the weekend see Sydney United 58 face Bayswater City at the Socceroo Factory. Sydney United Sports Centre, and Avondale will debut, we hope, Bruno Fornaroli against Canberra, Croatia at Avenger Park. So much to like about that opening round of the Australian Championship, and we hope that there's been plenty to like about the opening episode of The Second Ball. For all the learnings, for all the tests, for all the insights, good, bad, and indifferent about what each round of the championship has to offer Australian football in the long term, The Second Ball is going to be there wherever you like to get your podcast. So from myself, Lockie Flanagan, and from Lockie Abel, it's goodbye for now, and we'll see you on the other side of a very exciting new chapter and a big weekend for Australian football.